Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, listen to Sarah Loganbill interview Reverend Paige Graves about her journey of faith, her call to ministry, and how God is using her in His kingdom.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today here with Pastor Paige Graves, and got the privilege of hearing you speak a few weeks ago at a conference. And so I've really been looking forward to you getting to share your story and just to hear more about you. So with that, we'll jump right in. Paige, would you like to tell us about your story of faith, upbringing, how you had your call to ministry? We would love to hear more about that.
Okay, maybe it's a little lengthy, hopefully not too long.
No problem at all.
Yes, so I'm a third generation Nazarene. So my grandpa was a Nazarene layperson. He was also a farmer. He had 11 kids. So my mom was one of those. However, I kind of consider myself a little bit of a hybrid though, because even though my extended family was religious, when I was born, I was not born into a Christian home. And so for some reason, and this is just God's prevenient grace, but at the age of 10, just felt like I needed to go to church. And so I started going with some extended family to the local Nazarene church in the town I grew up in. And just remember like the people just being so loving and kind. Pastor there, he would often, when his granddaughter was in town, and I don't even know if he would even remember this, and I've actually heard that he passed away not too long ago, but he and his wife would invite me over after church for lunch and to play games with his granddaughter when she'd be in town. And so I just felt that love of the pastor, the love of the church, and just remember during one of his sermons, he's talking about salvation. But as a 10-year-old little girl, I was scared to go to the altar. But when I got home, I remember kneeling by my bed and just giving my life to the Lord. And so I got saved at the age of 10. And then from there, like I said, I wasn't raised in a Christian home at that time. My mom had walked away from the Lord. And so just even at that age, I had a huge burden for souls, and in particular, my mom. And so I began to pray for her. And every night for 2 years, I would pray for my mom's salvation, to the point where I remember my pillows being like tear soaked. And I just remember at the age of 12, my mom, all of a sudden, I say all of a sudden, but again, God's prevenient grace, was working in her life, and she decided she wanted to start going to church. And I remember the day that she took my hand and we walked to the altar, and she rededicated her life back to the Lord. And I lived in a Christian home after that. So I prayed for my mom during all that time, and she got saved. And then I was also praying, my parents were divorced. And so I was praying for my stepmom and stepdad and my dad. And it's just so cool to see how God answers prayer, because 2 years after my mom got saved, my stepmom started going to church. She got saved. And then several years later, like I was into my 30s, my stepdad got diagnosed with cancer and gave his life to the Lord, and died shortly thereafter. And then my dad, and this was just a few years ago, I got a phone call. I was out of town and had been praying for him for years. And he had always said, Paige, I'm a good person. And I would always tell him, Dad, that's not what it's about. It's about salvation. Your heart needs to be saved by the Lord. And so he was unconscious. And I remember coming to his hospital bed and just like praying over him and just telling him, like, I know you're in that state, but you can pray for forgiveness. And just really hoping that the Lord would just reach him where he was. And I had to leave and then come back. And so as I was praying for him, like, even though I had peace that the Lord could save him there, I was like, Lord, is there any way that you could just wake him up so that I know? And he did. He woke up when I was out of town, and my sister was able to talk to him. And so we knew for a fact that he had given his life to the Lord. He got baptized, poured over. And then as soon as that happened, not much long after that, hours later, he was back in that unconscious state, and then ended up passing away probably the next day. And so all four of my parents gave their life to the Lord, and so thankful for that. So that's kind of like the parental journey there. But I will say that I did not live that life fully very well. I've always been sensitive, to the faith, to the Christian faith, but there were moments during, middle and high school where I'm walking that fine line. Like I wanted both. I wanted the world and the Christian faith. And so I had one foot in, one foot out that entire time. And I go to college. So I attended Mount Vernon Nazarene University. I met my husband there. And when we were early married, I was still in that spiritual state of that half and half, and went through a really difficult time of infertility. And that was the hardest thing that I could have gone through. And it was really just a turning point. I was very angry with the Lord that he wasn't blessing me with children the way he was other people. And so I became pretty rebellious during that time. And I started masking some of that with alcohol. And that's always a shame piece, and growing up Nazarene, like that's just not something we do. And so, but I had turned to that medicinally. I would say I was getting to the place too, where I was, drinking by myself, drunk driving sometimes. And so just was taking a different path that I knew I shouldn't be taking. I got to the place where I literally wanted to die, just so hurt inside, and it just wouldn't go away. And so, there were times that I tell the story because, there's just times when I would just drive down the road and I would think, I just want to turn my car into the semi that's oncoming and just let it be done. I just want the pain to stop. And I couldn't get it to go away. And I was too scared to do that. So I thought divorce would be the next answer. And I always say it's not because I didn't love my husband. It was because I needed relief. I needed to stop feeling the pressure of wanting to be a mom. And if I wasn't married, then that's what it would be. And so I just believed the lies of the enemy that told me, untruths. That's not what God wanted me to hear. And just through a series of events, and I will tell you, like, we've tried everything to have a baby, and just through a series of events, right when I was about to consider the divorce option, we got a phone call about an adoption opportunity. Now, I will tell you, everything up to that point had failed, including other adoption opportunities. And when we got this phone call, I was like, you know what, we'll take this as a last resort. And when it doesn't work out, I kept thinking, this is not going to work out. So when it doesn't, then this will be my final piece and I can walk away. But it ended up working out. And so we adopted our oldest son, Carter, and got him right from birth. And when he was 8 weeks old, we found out we were 14 weeks pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they are 8 months apart. And that was just such a miracle time.
Yeah.
And when Carter came, I remember we were stuck in the state where he was born. We couldn't leave yet because of paperwork that had to be done. And I'm holding my son the next day and just crying because I'm just reminded, like, Jesus sent his son and we don't deserve it. I thought I deserved all these things. I deserved to be a mom, but I didn't. God was so gracious to me. And he gave me this little boy, and I rededicated my life back to the Lord, holding him. And he is just such a reminder of that. I say all three of my kids are Ebenezer stones because he's my reminder of rededication to the Lord. And then my second son, coming so close afterwards, represented to me my time of entire sanctification, which happened a couple of years after my rededication moment. And then I have a daughter. So again, did not think that we could have kids. Like, just thought this baby that God allowed us to have was just a miracle baby. And he is and was. But the boys really wanted a little sister. And so they began praying. And I'm like, guys, I don't know what to tell you. But and sure enough, God gave us a daughter a few years later. And she just represents the call to ministry for me. And so, and so with the call to ministry piece, I had actually gone to a conference. I was feeling some stirrings that God was maybe dealing with my heart on ministry. And truth be told, if I were to go back to my senior year of high school, or actually right before college, after my senior year, I had gone to NYC in Toronto, 99, and was one of those who knelt at the altar of, yes, Lord, I will go wherever you call me to go. But I just didn't follow that. And I feel like the Lord was bringing me back to that moment. And so I was feeling those stirrings of ministry and went to a women's conference and was just watching these women speak. And I had friends that were sitting with me. And I don't know why they even said this, because I wasn't doing anything remotely related. But I had friends that were like, Paige, I can see you doing that one day. And I was like, why are you saying that? Because the Lord's already dealing with me and no one knows it. Not even my husband, no one knows. And so I'm kind of going through, and I ended up buying a Bible. It was a study Bible, and just felt like on the way home, I needed to spend time fasting and praying that if the Lord was leading in this direction, then that's what I needed to do. And so he led me to the book of Esther. And I fasted and prayed about the call to ministry during Holy Week that year. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they all come and go. And I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm good. I know you're probably not leading in this direction. And then we, sure enough, get to Thursday. And in Esther chapter 4, Mordecai's talking to Esther about what she needs to do in her role. And that if she does not do what she is supposed to do, that's disobedience. Her family won't be blessed. God will raise up someone else. And then he says, who knows that you've been placed in the kingdom for such a time as this. And I just started weeping and just knowing that the Lord was saying, this is the moment. And so this is the call to ministry. And so I committed to that, and then was kind of waiting on what was next, what doors were to be opened. And that's when a few months later, I was entirely sanctified. So the call to ministry came first, but then before I could move into it, God needed all of me. And so I surrendered all of me, consecrated all of myself to the Lord in July of 2012. And right after that, God began putting me into positions, stepping stones really of ministry. So
Wow, what an incredible story.
whew, God is good. That's all I know.
Yes, yes, he is. Well, okay, that's great. That leads us right into the next question I have for you is just tell us about what you're doing now, both in life and in ministry, and where you're at.
Yeah, so I was a high school business teacher for a while. I actually, again, fasted and prayed to stay home because I was crying every day leaving my kids. And that was another, I mean, that's another huge answered prayer of how God just provided. And so after 10 years in education and all these plans that I had for myself, I ended up staying home, and I still do that. That is my primary ultimate ministry, are my children, my husband, my home. That will always, that's number one. And so I have gotten to do that. And then as part of that, and because I have, and a lot more time now because all three of my kids are in school, I teach. So one of the stepping stones after God's call to ministry was to begin leading Bible study. And so since 2012, I have been leading the same women's Bible study on Wednesday nights at church. I felt very passionate about women being in the Word. Like, it's just so important that women know the Word. They're teaching their kids in their homes. And so they need to know where we stand, why we stand, and what the truth of the Word of God says. And so we dig in. And we'll do book studies as well, but the majority of the Bible study is about God's Word. So I teach that on Wednesday nights. I used to lead women's ministry, and through that, I don't do that anymore. But because of that, that put me in positions of speaking. And I never in a million years thought that that's what the Lord would call me to. I get so nervous, and I don't know, but the Lord just takes over. And so he began putting me in positions of speaking for women's ministry events and developing this skill in me. Like, it's not me. I know it is all him, because there's no way I could do that all by myself. And so through that, and I think through the messages he's given me, that's opened up more opportunities and then led from not just speaking, but also to preaching ministry. And I pulpit fill for a couple of pastors. So I'll have pastors on the district who will call and say, can you cover a Sunday? And then we have a campus church of our church. And so their pastor will have me come every so often to cover for him. So I'm preaching. I do retreats and conferences, a lot of women's ministry conferences and retreats, which I love so much. I love getting to be with Nazarene women. And so that's the main thing. So teaching, speaking, and preaching have been the ministries that God has called me to. So it's been neat.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, okay. So you touched a little bit on this, and I can relate because I have two littles at home. So how are you juggling life and ministry and being a full-time mom? And what encouragement would you give to fellow moms who are also doing the same?
Yes. So one thing that I do is I have a calendar, and I don't use a computer calendar. I always say I'm like a 90-year-old in a 40-year-old's body because I don't do well with technology. So I have my little paper calendar. And I tend to start with my kids first and their schedule. Like I said, they are my main ministry, my priority. And so I tend to fill in their things. And then from there, as I'm asked to do things, if it fits within the schedule. And what's funny is it always does. I think the Lord has just opened up my schedule, and he redeems my time. And so I'm able to do a lot of the ministry things that I'm asked to do in terms of the speaking. Now, Wednesday night church and all of that, we're already there anyway. Sunday mornings already there anyway. So definitely I use the calendar. And, there are also times when I realize that there are just busy seasons. And so sometimes I just have to make it through and depend on the Lord to get through what is a busy season. And they're like with different sports seasons, it's going to be busier. If I'm taking a ministry class while I'm doing sports and, ministry opportunities, it's just a busy season, but I just depend on the Lord every day. And one of the things I learned early on is every morning I begin with prayer and devotion time. And the Lord and I literally go through our day. It is our day. It's his day. It's not my day. And so I'm like, Lord, I have this, and this. Like, how do we do this? And so sometimes it's the Lord waking me up earlier so I can begin that time and we map out how we're going to get this done today. It's just, I'm so thankful for Jesus by my side every day because there's just no way I could do it. And so I just really believe that through that prayer time, he just gives me the time to get things done. And I use a lot of the daytime when the kids are at school to get a lot of that work done because I want to save the rest of myself and not be stressed or busy outside of school for them. So I use a lot of my time and try to work really well in the time that I'm allotted when they're gone. So the calendar, the timepiece, the prayer. And one of the things you had mentioned, the encouragement for moms. One of the things I remember hearing on the drive to work one day when I used to work was something from Lisa Turkhurst. And she said, bad moments don't make bad mamas. And I just try to remember that because sometimes in the busyness, it can get stressful and I may not be as patient as I should be because there's 8 million things to do. But I have to remember to give myself grace. And that just because I have one bad moment doesn't mean that that makes me a bad mom, even though the enemy wants to tell me that I am in those moments. And I just pray that God always stands in the gap and covers those things for me, that he just removes from their memory any time that I haven't been as patient as I should be. And my kids are just so gracious and they're resilient and just so loving and forgiving. And we talk about that too. And there's a sense of maturity in these 3 kids that it only can come from the Lord because that is not from us. But they are so good and mature and wise to the things that are going on. And they're like, Mom, we know it's busy. And so I love them. They're great.
Amazing. That's great. I'm going to remember that. Bad moments don't make bad mamas. That's good.
Yeah.
All right. So what goals do you have both personally or in your ministry? And I guess where do you hope your current role goes in the future?
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention this earlier too. I am also at my church, I'm doing what's kind of like an internship. So I'm called a resident pastor. And what I do is I shadow the areas. Well, I'm actually shadowing everything in the church right now because everything is so interesting and there's just so many details and intricacies of what happens within a church and how it's run. And so the main purpose of my internship program is to really shadow and be mentored by people who do what I feel like the Lord is calling me to do, whether that's pastoring, teaching pastor connections, those areas. And so I'm learning from those experiences and from those people. But I would say my goal has and always will be to be in the center of God's will, that I don't have anything else. And the reason why I say that is because that's true, but also because I've never had to put myself anywhere. God has always opened the doors and led me to positions where He wants me to be at the right times. And so He has always done that. He has always blessed that work. And I can just trust Him moving forward, that whatever He has for me, He'll open the next doors for that to happen. And so that's my goal, is to just sit in the center of God's will and let Him lead the way.
That's beautiful testimony. Yes, I love it. Is there anyone or maybe multiple people who have influenced or impacted your call to ministry or your life up to this point?
Yes, it's funny. When I was 16 years old, I met Dr. Nina Gunner. She was it was when she was in charge of missions for the denomination. And so she was our speaker for a missions convention one year. And it's so funny. She remembers this. Like, she has remembered from that moment that I went up to her and I was like, I'm going to have your job someday. I don't even know why I said that, but I love missions and have always loved missions. And I loved her role. I love what she was doing. And she's just always someone that I have looked to. She is such a bold preacher. She is strong and powerful. And and not power of herself. Like, it is the power of the Lord. It's just so clear that God just lives in her. And so I have always loved her, and she touches base with me every so often. Like, we'll talk, and she's just such an encourager of ministry. And I think being a woman in ministry, like, she gets it. Like, it's hard because there's the household aspect and then there's the ministry part too. And so she's just been a great role model for me to look to within the Church of the Nazarene. So I love her. And then I would say a lot of pastors in my life, I watch them, and the ones that I know and respect, those are the ones that I'm watching and paying attention to, and just praying that some of who they are and what they do just rubs off on me. And I would say out of all of those, my favorite pastor is my father-in-law, Dr. David Graves. He's my favorite pastor. I think he is the best pastor. And I don't think that that's a bias. Like, I just put him up here. But he's just like so wise and, again, like so bold in his preaching. And I just respect him. I respect his life. I respect the things that he says. And I love his method and the way that he preaches. And so he's just someone that I am always watching and paying attention to in his ministry, and especially in how he preaches as well. So
yes, we love Dr. Graves as well.
He's very loved.
Yes. All right. So you may have already touched on this earlier. I heard you mention Esther, but if you related most to a Bible character, who would it be? Just kind of a fun question.
Yeah, that's her. And it's actually my daughter. That verse that God spoke to me on ministry on is my daughter's life verse. I believe He has great plans for, well, all three of my kids, but out of that verse for her middle name is Esther. That is my mom's name, Esther.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of a big thing for us. But yes, and I relate to Esther in this way. I feel like she and I, as I've read her story, I can imagine that there was just so much anxiety and just being apprehensive of what she was being called to do. And I feel like that on a regular basis. As I sit on leadership boards, preaching, speaking, teaching, there's always a sense of apprehension. Are we sure? Am I doing this right? Like, just all of those questions and second guessing kind of come to me. But where it comes down to, and what I see in her, is it's always just taking the step of faith. Like, I don't know how it's going to turn out. It could turn out good or bad, but I'm being called to take a step of faith and let the Lord deal with it however he chooses to deal with it. And so that's why I probably relate to her story the most, because she took the step of faith, even when it was going to cost her her life. I don't know what that's like, to have my physical life on the line. But I know that there are times when God has called me to do things that are not popular. He's called me to speak truth or to be bold in a particular way. And I've just had to do it, even though I've been scared. And so just taking that step of faith and then God working through that. And so I just put my trust in him like she did. And I would say even more so, she probably put it in Mordecai's pushing. And so sometimes we need those people kind of pushing us to do what we need to do, but to honor God in all that we do. So yeah, she's my girl, and I want to meet her one day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's something we can all relate to for sure. Thank you. That's great. Okay, before we wrap up, would you like to tell us just a fun fact about you, something you want to share with our listeners?
Oh my word. I don't know if I'm really considered a fun fact type of person. I feel like I'm such a boring person. Yes, I mean, I do really boring things. I don't know. I like a nap. That's what I like.
Hey,
there's those shirts that talk about how Jesus took naps, so be like Jesus.
Yes.
Yep, that's me. Yes. I would say I like naps. I like food. We're big foodies in our house. We love to try restaurants.
Yes.
I don't know. Oh goodness. I like to read when I find the time to do it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't
know.
really
Those are great.
No, I'm not.
Reading, naps, and food. I think you and I are very similar. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been amazing, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with our listeners and just everyone getting to know you more. So we appreciate you. We're praying for you. And thanks again for joining us on our podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.